Another video on doylist versus Watsonian takes on versus battles. Here I want to talk about why doylists push against the idea of feats being the only thing that matters. Because usually when you take a Watsonian take on a versus battle, they attempt to put these characters in a neutral setting and their only motivation is to kill the other character, or otherwise incapacitate them. Now again, I'm not saying that doylism or Watsonianism are right, they're just two different schools of thought. But from a doylist perspective, characters are fiction. They only show up in fiction. Like, there isn't a real-world Goku out there. So the only context in which these characters exist is in a work of fiction. And so if you're asking a question like, who would win X versus Y, if these characters aren't acting in a way that is consistent with how we have seen them act throughout their entire body of literature, then we're not comparing these two characters. We are comparing a power set that comes from one of those characters and putting it on a robot, a mindless death robot. But personality and motivation and narrative theme is just as much a part of a character from a doylist perspective as how hard they can punch or whether they could blow up a star. And Watsonians sometimes argue that any author can make any character do anything, but from a literary analysis perspective, that's not necessarily the case. For example, stories where characters act way out of character and do stuff that you wouldn't expect them to do, they usually fail and many times get retconned out of existence. So there is a cultural force keeping these characters acting in a certain way that has been established by the author. And those are the character's limits from a doylist perspective. Additionally, from a doylist perspective, that thing you are doing where you are putting two characters in a quote-unquote neutral ground and just making them want to kill each other, that too is a work of fiction. It's a very simple work of fiction, but it's a work of fiction. Two fictional characters are being put in a fictional setting and you're creating a fictional outcome to a fictional fight. At which point a doylist looks at this neutral setting, bloodlusted behavior and goes, that's not particularly accurate to either of those characters' narratives. And they only exist in narrative, they only exist in fiction. So they examine that fiction, that neutral, bloodlusted fiction, and go, that doesn't seem plausible. If these two characters were to meet, it wouldn't be in that context. It would be in a work of crossover fiction that you could buy in a comic store or watch on TV. And that work of crossover fiction would be a lot closer to how the character behaves in their franchise of origin. Which, from a doylist perspective, makes analyzing versus battles in this way a lot more accurate. Again, just two different schools of thought.